Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a few moments. We'll give everybody an opportunity to get situated, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming today. I look forward to a good interactive session, maybe a small group today. Because I didn't think about it when I scheduled this, that it is on election day in the US, so that could potentially limit the number of people we have on today. But if you want to go ahead and drop in the chat where you're coming in from today, I'd love to hear from you. I see my friend Fitz is here, and a couple of my colleagues are here as they are going to be preparing to cover for me while I'm away for a few weeks. So welcome to Lisa and Sarah. Okay, sorry, let me share the other screen. Thank you, Fitz. I always do something wrong. It wouldn't be a webinar with me if I didn't do something wrong. So, and we got Washington, D.C., we got Maryland, we got London in the house. Is anybody going to World Forum this week in New York? If so, I will be there, so let me know. I'd love to connect with you. And we'll give it another couple minutes here. See if anybody else is going to come in today. I did have a few more people registered. So it looks like a few of you know each other. So that's always awesome. And I'm really excited about today's webinar. Brian is an expert in being an engagement manager and running projects for expert services. So I think this will be a great opportunity to learn from his experience, as well as I used to have that role as well for when I first started at ServiceNow for a long time. And maybe I'll have still have a few bits of wisdom to share. So looks like we've got everybody in. I normally wait another minute, but like I said, we don't have a lot of registrations for today. So we'll go ahead and get things kicked off here. Today we're going to be talking about how to work with ServiceNow Expert Services, which is our arm of the company, which a lot of companies call professional services, where you can engage us to come in and help you run your implementation projects. So that's what we'll be talking about today. But before we go ahead and get started, I want to just bring up the safe harbor notice. It's probably not relevant for this webinar because we're not talking about any future enhancements, but just in case any future enhancements or capabilities in the platform are mentioned, they are not guarantees that those will actually be happening. And also this session is recorded, so if you do ask any questions during the Q&A, that will be part of the recording. So please make sure that you're not sharing confidential information. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Most of you know me. I've been hosting these Ask the Experts webinars since July. I'm a 15-year veteran with ServiceNow, having been an engagement manager for 10 years in the field, and then more recently working on our leading practices team in our marketing group, which I know sounds scary, but I try to produce content that helps folks post-sales implement our products. And Brian, would you like to give us a quick intro on yourself?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So I've been with ServiceNow for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was with Hewlett Packard / Micro Focus. And so, and actually prior to that, I was with another company. So where I was a developer as well as tester. So very technical back in the day, a bit rusty now. But what I've really always enjoyed is actually helping, bridge business and technical and actually coming to, deliver solutions. So I've been doing this for many, many years, and it's a lot of fun.
It is. It's always fun to go in and meet new customers and find out about their business and help them be more successful. So what are we going to talk about today? We have a few topics queued up for you around this. I mean, it's obviously a big topic for an hour's worth of time. But first of all, what you can expect when you choose to work with our ServiceNow Expert Services for your implementation. I kind of call this what to expect when you're expecting with expert services. How can you best prepare to hit the ground running once you've engaged us? And then why use our implementation methodology called Now Create? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also have some time for questions and answers. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A, and we'll make sure that those are saved for later. And then we'll do a wrap up, obviously, and close things out. So the goal of this webinar is for you to learn how to best partner with our expert services team to deliver your ServiceNow projects successfully. And we hope that you will find that to be the case once you have gone through this webinar, that you feel comfortable with that. So for those of you who come to my webinars, you know I love me a poll. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll here. Just curious of the folks here, you know, what is your impression of expert service, or your level of knowledge of what they do? If you want to go ahead and drop that into the poll there. Don't be shy. No wrong answers. We don't call anybody out. It's all anonymous, so we don't say, oh, look, Sarah doesn't know what she's talking about. So please feel free to drop those in there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. It looks like we've got most everybody has responded. So we're kind of on either end of the spectrum. Some people seem really familiar with our expert services, and others are not so much. So let me end the poll here, and I will stop talking so Brian can start sharing his wisdom with you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So again, expert services basically is project-based engagement. So that really means there's a start and an end. And so implementation, that's where I'm primarily focused on, but we also provide advisory services as well as optimization services. So implementation such as go implement HRSD or some of our other offerings, ITSM or whatnot. So we have multiple roles that you can expect to see. So an engagement manager, that's again what I do. Kind of the planner, you know, my job is obviously main focus is on budget, on time, within scope, but also to obviously risks, issues, escalations, and governance and that kind of stuff. The next role we have is a business process consultant, kind of the quote unquote detective. And this is a person that's going to work with you to understand, you know, what are your needs, what are your requirements, and helping capture those into user stories. In our next role, the technical consultant, the person who I think has the most fun, the builder, the person who takes those requirements and actually implements them within ServiceNow. We do have supporting roles such as a solutions architect, program director, and practice director. And if anyone's interested, I can kind of go into those in more detail. I've also been a program director in the past, so I have a little bit more detailed experience in that. But again, it's very much a team effort and very collaborative effort across the team with your corporation as well as, you know, internally within ServiceNow.
Great.
Okay, so again, big question. I mean, what can you expect? So obviously, you would expect from the people standpoint, domain expertise. So again, ServiceNow is huge, absolutely huge. So we do have folks that are very much focused into ITSM, or others who are focused into, you know, IT operations manager or HRSD, which is from an HR standpoint, or CSM, customer service management. And so again, when we start an engagement, we make sure we definitely bring in the folks that have the requisite skill sets and who have done this over and over and over again. So they have the experience of going to multiple different corporate companies across different industries and bringing in that expertise to help, you know, provide the best guidance to you and you know, and make sure the journey itself is definitely proper. From a process standpoint, Now Create, we're going to touch a lot more on Now Create in later slides. Again, just touch on, there's a lot more detail on Now Create, but Now Create is our methodology for successfully delivering, you know, value to you, success packs, starter stories. The really cool thing is that if, you know, there's links for Now Create at the end of the deck. All this is available to you right now. So if you want to go through and learn about Now Create, it's there. great webinars on it. Success packs are there for you to download. So lots of great collateral that you can actually get today. From a technology standpoint, we do have what we call the EM instance, and that's really for when the scenario works out, we actually have an instance where we're on the platform where we actually manage the engagement itself. That's managing the user stories, managing testing, managing the end to end from a delivery standpoint. So some of the questions we get is Now Create required? No, it is not. It is definitely highly recommended, of course. We definitely leverage the content. So I look at it personally as puzzle pieces. So Now Create has, the workshop content, it has questionnaires, it has other collateral that even if we don't use Now Create itself, let's use those puzzle pieces and then plug them into how you do things. So again, Now Create is definitely recommended. And in full transparency, there's probably very few engagements where I've actually used Now Create, pure play Now Create. It's really a merger of how you do things, leveraging as much of Now Create as we can, and bringing everything together. Again, great content, which you can again get today, which is awesome.
Yeah, and integrating that with how the customer already does project management is always the key.
Absolutely. Can we use other tools? Absolutely. Again, from a tool standpoint, Jira obviously very popular, so we can definitely use Jira if that's what your standards are. But if not, then we have obviously our PPM. Can we adapt to how you use Agile? Absolutely. So in terms of if you work in like a program increment, like a safe type of process, or we can definitely come in. And in all honesty, when we first step in, if you can move to the next point, one of the key things is, can we be adaptive? Absolutely. One of the key things, though, in my opinion, is at the very beginning in the engagement is to establish what are your standards, and this is kind of where I play a big part, is coming in to understand what those standards are, establishing those at the very front end, and seeing how we best can incorporate things. So if you use Jira, that's fine. How do you define story points? Is it, one story point equals 1 hour, or one story point equals, basically 6 hours? But I've seen it, many, many different ways. When do you start a sprint, Wednesday to Tuesday, which is kind of my preference because most everyone takes off for, Mondays and Fridays, or you do a Monday to Thursday cadence. So again, we can be very adaptive, but the key is to establish that at the very outset.
And to have that discipline in place, however
Absolutely.
we get it there, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so our first real phase, so there's another phase called getting started, and we'll hit that in a second. But from when the team hits the ground, initiate, this is where I honestly, in the beginning of planning, am the busiest in all reality. Initiate really typically lasts 1 to 2 weeks. And this is really kind of getting everyone aligned, acclimated, and on the same page. So some of the key activities: establishing the initial project plan, kind of high level. In the planning phase, we flesh out put meat on the bones, if you will. Have a kickoff meeting, and the agenda, kind of a summary of the high level agenda items are on the right hand side. So again, the kickoff meeting is real critical to make sure that your team, the ServiceNow team, come together, in partnership, and everyone's aligned with what's the scope. Because again, a lot of folks coming in won't really know, what was sold from a statement of work standpoint, what are the key dates, what are the key drivers, those type of things, what are the key measures, how are we going to actually run the engagement. So all these type of things get fleshed out in the actual kickoff meeting itself. Then we start planning for the workshops, and again, we're going to talk a lot more about workshops coming up. And so that's real critical. So from a next step is really going into the planning phase. Now, this could be weeks or months, and the reason why there's a big difference there is simply because how large is the actual engagement itself. So if it's fairly small, then it could be weeks, but if it's very large, it could be several months. So we go through, and again, standard project management activities. Go through and start really detailing out the release and sprint planning. Start on the go live transition plan. At least start the process. From a workshop standpoint, it's real critical that we have again, workshops, I'm a big believer in how we do our workshops. Again, there's different ways to elicit requirements, work out user stories, but our workshops are really, and again, we're going to hit on that more in a second, but, on site, bringing everyone together, building those relationships, bringing everyone together to really kind of talk through getting those requirements, making sure that we're all level set on what ServiceNow does, understanding what your needs are and that type of thing. So again, you can see kind of a high level agenda here on the right hand side. This is one you would see in our incident workshop. And we do have workshops for obviously for problem, for knowledge management, for all the other, processes as well. Just trying to give a kind of high level example. Back to the key activities, establishing technical governance, which is actually obviously very critical. We're doing our story refinement. So again, workshops going through and saying, let's go through and make sure we're aligned, start gathering the requirements. But when you exit the actual workshops themselves, we have to get to a point to where we, really flush out the stories, acceptance criteria. We've pointed the stories. We've gone all the way through the process of what I call, have an executable user story that you can hand to a developer and they can go do, right? And they have everything they need to go do. And then also starting on the test strategy itself.
Yeah, and I love how you bring out the testing and the go live in the plan phase, because I feel like a lot of customers think, oh, well, I'll worry about that later, but now's the time to start thinking about that.
A lot of work.
Yeah.
Not to go into too much detail here, but a typical question we get is how much time do I need from my team? Again, this is variable based off of different factors, but this kind of high level. I will point out in the plan phase, though, you'll notice that the product owners and the process owners, platform owners and platform architects, that's 100%. So the reality is, and this is again, a lot of the workshops kind of coming in and saying, what are your requirements, fleshing out the user stories, making sure we have acceptance criteria fully fleshed out, having all that really solid, rock solid helps out a lot. And it really takes a lot of dedication. So if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right, and it's worth having the focus to actually make sure it's actually done right. And
Yeah.
by the way, I will say this. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Okay.
I will say this is one of the biggest challenges that I do see going into, starting a new engagement. Everyone's so busy. You have a lot of different, priorities, but everyone's trying to split their time. And if you have a product owner, a process owner that can only dedicate 25% of their time, and who can attend, can periodically attend workshops, it's going to really drag out the planning phase. So it's going to be very, very problematic.
It is. And this is one of the biggest challenges. Like you said, most companies are so busy, they don't have extra people to spare. But if you really want to get through this project on time, you gotta, you gotta put in the effort here. The next thing we're going to talk about a little bit is, some of you may have heard about a product that we have called Impact. And so we don't want to make this into a marketing webinar about impact, but we just want to make sure that folks understand what is the differences between the two. So I have a poll up here. If you want to go ahead and let me know what you think is the difference between our expert services and impact. We'd love to know, because there just seemed to be a little bit of confusion out there in the wild about what our product is. And so we'd like to just take a couple minutes to clear that up. So once again, it looks like we kind of have a split between some people knowing exactly what it is and others maybe wondering what it is. And sorry, Kitty's gonna have to go here. She always likes to help. So yeah, it looks like most people are kind of like, well, what is impact? So we're just going to take a few minutes to talk about that. Again, I said, we're not trying to make this a marketing session for impact. This is, to give you some awareness of what it is, so that you know what we're talking about when we mention impact.
Yeah, so Impact. So first, I work very closely with Impact on my particular engagements, and they are really helpful from this one from a strategic standpoint. So, and we'll have another slide that kind of comes up and provides a good visual for that. But it's really the start to end from a when you have ServiceNow, when you first get on the platform all the way, all the way through from, from end to end. And they work very closely with helping you from a strategy standpoint, looking from a value standpoint, and helping you have a very forward-looking type of approach. And there's other services they provide too, but that's where I work very closely with Impact.
Sorry. Um,
And so some of the key roles, the customer success manager, kind of the quarterback, this is the person that kind of can help coordinate bringing in the Impact folks when needed and help answer at least initiate the answering the questions from an Impact standpoint. Success architect, this is a person that can kind of help with, value and helping you define those metrics in terms of, is ServiceNow, helping you measure the value that ServiceNow is actually providing. The platform architect is the person that kind of helps from a technical advisory standpoint. Again, ServiceNow has a lot of different, products and services, and being able to tie everything together in a very smart, intelligent way. Platform architect does a great job at this. And then the support account manager, and when you have issues that do kind of come up, Sam helps out tremendously, can help manage tickets as tickets kind of come in and help escalate things as needed. So especially when you get into implementation and you run into potential issues, that really kind of becomes my best friend. I'll be honest with you, because if we do have a ticket, we need it resolved very quickly, and they can kind of help push things along.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest differentiations between Impact and Expert Services right now is that Impact is typically not hands-on keyboard, and I think that's where we've had some
Good point.
confusion with people. The next slide, we have a nice graphic where Brian will kind of explain a little bit more the differences and how they work.
Yeah, so again, Impact is a subscription-based product. And again, it's intended to, once you start, your contract with ServiceNow, just from a licensing standpoint, all the way to the end, that's Impact. So it's going to span multiple years. Now, from expert services, this is where I sit. This is from a project to project. So ITSM, and again, these projects can overlap. So you can start an ITSM engagement and then have HRSD start 3 months later or whatnot. But the thing is, you're implementing ITSM, and then you can switch over to HRSD and then CSM or other type of things. So clear start date and date. So hopefully this kind of helps. I'm hoping, again, strategy versus, again, at this level, it's more strategy versus, I guess more tactical.
Yeah, 100%. So switching gears back to expert services, we did talk a little bit about, preparation and what to do when you're going to be having an expert services engagement. But just want to take a quick poll here and see what your thoughts are as far as what you feel is necessary for you to do before you engage with expert services. I might have stacked the deck here a little bit on the answers. But love to hear what you folks think of how you would prepare for an engagement with us to come on site and help you implement ServiceNow. All right, so we got 2 answers so far, 3 answers. Okay, so most people are leaning more towards the third choice, which I think is a good one. So it looks like we've got most of everybody has responded. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I'm going to let Brian dive in a little bit more into what you needed to do to prepare for our workshops.
Okay. All right. So getting ready to start the journey. So the first thing is, and this is really activities that you're doing. I guess one thing I did want to point out. Typically, expert services, the statement of work is, work through, with your organization, and then we actually come in. So a lot of these activities are kind of before we actually walk in the door. So these are activities that will be helpful for you to get started off on the right foot. So when we do walk in the door, you're ready to get going. So first, I would say assigning an executive sponsor. Really, you need someone that can really take ownership of the success of the actual engagement, can help remove roadblocks because roadblocks will happen, and they can kind of come in and actually advocate for the engagement itself and get those roadblocks actually removed. That helps out tremendously. Complete the getting started. We'll touch on that here more in a second, but this is collateral that you can download today. And this is part of the overarching, now create. These are action items. These are questionnaires. These are things that you can take and actually go through and review. And when we kind of come in, you're prepped to come in and answer the questions that we're going to come in. So either you can do it on your own, or you can have us come in and do it. That's just going to obviously take more time. Assign and prepare your team. So really, that's kind of getting into the other point too that I have down here is ServiceNow training. Typically in our sales, we go through and talk about here are the type of trainings that you actually need to actually go through. And this helps out a lot in the workshops too, because if we're going into a workshop and no one's ever seen on your team ServiceNow, then we're going to spend a lot of time getting them aligned to here's what ServiceNow is and actually walking them through things that the reality is the content's already out there. Training content's already available. We'll list it out in terms of what you need to go through. So that prep work really will make, the future sessions, the workshops much more effective and efficient. And let's face it, more cost effective for you. Because that way we can get to, gathering requirements versus educating you on what's an incident, what's a problem.
Yeah.
And the other one too, the provisioning environment, this kind of gets into you may or may not know what needs to get provisioned. So for example, if you need to provision mid servers, you may need some help around that. And that's again, the expert services team can kind of help out with that. But there are some times where you do need to provision infrastructure. Mid servers is a good example. And for some organizations, that could take weeks, if not
Mhm.
more. You don't want to delay the engagement because of lack of hardware.
Exactly. If you've got security hoops you got to jump through and things like that, it can take a lot longer than it should.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so getting started again, content you can download now, actions that you can take, content, security questionnaires, stuff, great content to download now. Again, if you fill it out now, it will definitely expedite the actual overall engagement itself.
100%.
All right, why use Now Create?
Good question.
Great question. Well, the reality is we've delivered, thousands of engagements on Now Create. It's proven. It continues to get updated and improved. In fact, while putting this presentation together, I downloaded the latest and greatest kickoff presentation and significantly good strides. Honestly, the prior version was good. The latest version is pretty awesome. So great content continues to get updated. The getting started section is that was introduced last year. So continue to develop and evolve and make it better based off of what we learn. And this is again content that's available for you to download now. Again, there's on demand training you can look at. You have here. You have a link at the bottom. Definitely highly recommended to go take a look at it, but it's great stuff. And again, I pointed this out earlier. The reality is, even if we don't use Now Create, pure play every single step within Now Create, the content itself, again, puzzle pieces can actually fit together and should be leveraged. The questionnaires, the action items. Definitely, it's worth going through just to even look at, have you thought through everything that needs to happen? One of the key areas around organizational change management. That's something that's really not thought through enough, and we have great content on that as well, for example.
And you might already have a version of some of these documents at your organization, but maybe you need the ServiceNow flavor to it. So going out here and looking at that and seeing, what things did we add to that you might not have in your company process. So there is a lot of really great stuff out there.
And so this is a little bit more of a zoom in terms of Now Create itself. And so again, great content to review and download. Now, the success packs, again, this is where it's not just, it's a key part of Now Create. And again, it goes back to the questionnaires. There's great learning actually on the Now Create platform itself. And again, these assets, including process guides, for example, going back to templates, data packs, accelerators. Again, a lot of great content to go leverage today. Now, the success packs themselves, again, a lot to read here, but really we have domain-specific success packs. So, for example, ITSM, HRSD, so forth and so on, ITOM, for example. So it's not just generic, it's very much domain specific. So if you want to go through and see what does an implementation look like for ITOM, you can download that. You can look at the workshop decks. You can look at the questionnaires, high-level project plan. What are the activities that are actually required to successfully implement ITOM? All the content's actually, they're available for you today. So again, very domain specific, not generic. And this is extremely valuable.
Yeah, especially when you're doing something like ITOM and there's so much you need to prepare ahead of time or be thinking about that's different from other parts of the platform. So that's where I think we get the real value out of Now Create.
I wanted to go through just a real quick flyby on the incident workshop. And this is, again, if you look at the latest deck, these slides will, or these screenshots are going to look very familiar because this came directly from what you can get today. Now, there's over 130 slides. Obviously, I'm not going to go through 130 slides, but there's a lot of content. Again, the other thing too, the workshops themselves can be multi-day. They can take 2 or 3 days, depending on which process we actually go through itself. So again, this is the overall objective of an incident workshop. And then here's the actual approach. Again, reviewing the process guides, walking through incident management process. Now, the thing is, it's not just a PowerPoint presentation, that's it. It's PowerPoint to level set and talk through process guides, and we'll see some of those in a second too. But it's also bringing up the platform and actually walking through it and looking at categories, looking at how assignment groups, looking at different things within an incident, so you really understand what it really incident management is. So it's not just a dry PowerPoint by any stretch. It's really walking through the platform, answering your questions, and making sure you understand what the platform can actually do. So very collaborative, very interactive.
Percent.
And so again, here are just a few of the screenshots. When you download the content, you'll see this. So going through, looking at the life cycle, looking at a process overview, looking at escalations. Also too, look at the bottom, implementation tips. So also too, what are some tips in terms of implementing ServiceNow incident in this particular instance. Now the workshops themselves, again, very collaborative. And so this means, please be present, and we'll hit a slide on that in a second. But the reality is, definitely we're going to be asking a lot of questions, and definitely need to have the right folks in the room. And the next key point is we definitely prefer on-site workshops. The benefit is, number one, it really kind of gets people focused, because otherwise, if it's remote, people have a tendency of multitasking more, way too much. But the other thing too is it helps kind of build the relationships. How much, you can solve a lot of problems, get a lot of questions just by going out, between the breaks and getting coffee, right? Or having dinner and sitting down and talking through things. And you really learn a lot just from the interaction and building those relationships. We're going to spend, potentially months, if not longer, together. So let's get to know each other and, become great partners.
Yeah, and this might sound dorky, but when I had Kodak as a customer, we went bowling one night together. And it was really fun because we all kind of got to know each other outside of the work setting, and building, like you said, building those relationships is really important. So, taking a little time out to interact with people, I think, is really good too, because later in the workshop, you might be disagreeing about a point, but if you have a personal connection, it's much easier to work through that than if you're just like, well, this person disagrees with me and I don't like them. So That's another key I see in the on-site.
Yeah, we Top Golf. That's where I was a couple weeks ago with my current customer. So I'm not a very good golfer though. So anyway, keys to workshop success. Again, some of these I've already hit, but it's, in my opinion, it's very, very critical. Complete the training, complete the questionnaires. It really, the better your team is prepared coming in, the more effective and efficient the workshops are going to be. Open and honest dialogue. Let's come in and get it all out there. A readiness to embrace change. I will hit on this point. I've seen so many times where we come in and, certain folks are going to want to, they're going to really kind of go back to here's how our old system worked. And, the goal is not to recreate your old system on ServiceNow. There's no benefit to that. You really want to get better and improve and leverage new technologies, new concepts, new things like that. So, embracing change can be difficult, but be ready to embrace the change itself. As we mentioned before, we need the product owners in the room. We need the process owners. We need the other key stakeholders, the technical folks, the folks that really know, what can and can't be done with the organization. This kind of gets into the technical things, such as, firewalls. If you're talking about ITOM, CMDB, mid servers, you're going to have rules about, where you can put mid servers and the firewalls in between them, from an infrastructure standpoint. You need someone who actually understands those things so you can make the best decisions possible. And then from a follow-up standpoint, again, user stories get started in the workshops, but we have to get to where we can get to executable user stories. That's flushed out user story that's been approved with acceptance criteria, that's been pointed, that's technically feasible. All those great things that can be handed to a developer to go do. And that's where we definitely will need help after the workshop and from a follow-up standpoint.
And these are all really good points. And if I could add on a little bit, about the change, I find a lot of customers when you first start with them, they're really eager to go and change everything. But as time goes on and the process it's difficult, it's not easy to affect change. People tend to get tired and then they start wanting to revert back to what they were doing before. And so you have to kind of prepare yourself for the long haul on these things. And the other thing is sometimes, discussions can get a little heated, and you just have to figure out a way to manage that. When I was an engagement manager, I carried a rubber chicken with me that made this horrible squawking noise when you squeezed it. So if the room got out of control, I would just squeeze the chicken and it would kind of relieve the tension in the room and we could kind of get back to things. But, whatever works for you, that was my shtick. But, you just be prepared that, some people are going to have difficulty with that change and it can get a little heated, but you got to keep working through that. That's kind of the hard part.
I'll have to try that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, my rubber chicken has kind of, well, her legs have fallen off and she's in pretty bad shape. Golly. Anywho, that concludes our presentation for today. If anybody has a question, or multiple questions, let me know, and I can take you off mute. We're happy to answer questions here. You have a couple of us experts here who are battle tested in the field with doing implementations with customers. So please, if you have questions, or if you want to chime in on anything, always happy to hear from other people's perspectives.
If you don't mind, can you progress to the next slide?
Oh,
sure. The recap.
Oh yeah, that would be good, wouldn't
it?
um,
Okay. Yeah. So again, this to pull everything together as a reminder, Expect Services. Again, it's very much project based, and time based. Start and end, and the impact. It's again very strategic, and it's not just the things I mentioned too. You also have from a learning credit standpoint, they really do help out from a lot more than what I actually mentioned before. Great content out there, but great folks. And in all honesty, I will say that from an expert services standpoint, one of the other areas I do help leverage them a lot is that, if we have an engagement that's very much focused on, ITOM, for example, and questions may come up around Employee Center or, something else, then my team may can answer, but they may not be able to answer. And so Impact, bringing them in to kind of make sure that we get a very quick answer for you is actually very helpful. So again, having that very strategic view is great. In that way, my team can very much focus on ITOM in this example, but I can still get you an answer very quickly in terms of, another aspect of ServiceNow that you need to think about for next year, for example. So. And then now create, again, methodology that we use in Expert Services. Content is available for you to use to download today. And I know I've probably for the third time I said puzzle pieces. That's kind of the way I think about it. It's great, together, but a great content for you to leverage today. So even if you don't use Now Create, great process. Definitely, don't forget about the great content out there, the questionnaires, templates, action items, those type of things that can be incorporated into, how we do the actual engagement itself.
Yeah, and our team that works on Now Create is very responsive. So if you put in a suggestion, there's an area on Now Create where you can make suggestions. They're very responsive to that. And, so it's a living, breathing entity. So we're always looking to, for continuous improvement on Now Create as well. And your input is helpful for that.
Yeah, back to key points, executive sponsor and decision makers are absolutely critical. And, back into decision makers, when we're in workshops, it's great to get alignment. It's great to talk about requirements, but you need to make sure those requirements are actually, decided upon and they're agreed to. This is what we want to do. Not to get too far off on a different topic, but no, it's really the same topic, but the reality is I have seen plenty of times where we've gone through, workshops, we think we have the right answer, the person in the room says, yeah, this is what we want to do. When we get to implementation or execution, and it's people change their mind, and that causes delays, causes problems, and that's not where we want to be. We want to make sure we get the answer, the right answer, the approved answer, and that way we can be very effective and efficient.
And that can be, if you don't have that executive sponsor there, it can be really difficult. I had a big financial client and we were trying to define service catalog process, and we would think we'd get the process nailed, and somebody else would come in the room and be like, no, 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 this is the process. So they actually had like 3 different process owners for the same thing. So, as a customer, before we come in, you kind of need to also decide, what is your process going to be, so that we're not spinning our wheels and using your hours on that. And that's where, that executive sponsor really leading the way is so helpful, because if you don't have that executive sponsor, it can really extend the life of the project exponentially. I've seen.
Absolutely. Basically getting your organization prepared. And this kind of goes back into the getting started is absolutely a wonderful resource. Again, as I mentioned, that was added last year. So we've, that team, the Now Create team definitely listens to feedback. And that was a definitely something that I think is huge. And also I've had lots of experience with a lot of other types of development methodologies. I think the getting started is actually pretty unique to Now Create, because most methodologies are pretty much okay, let's start building out the project plan, yada yada yada, but there's a lot of activities that could happen before that, and that's where the getting started actually works out. So getting an organization ready is awesome. And then providing the resources, getting people engaged early, making sure they had enough time to participate and allocate. Because again, if everything's a priority, then there are no priorities, right? If someone has 5 different projects they're working on and they're all number one priority, then guess what? You really have no priority, right? So if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. I know I've already said that, but it really is true. So give people the ability to work on these engagements and fill those roles. And then at the very end, this is actually very, very critical. So we get through, we build, everything's wonderful, everyone loves it. Well, the reality is, you as an organization, you are dealing with a care and feeding, right? So you have to make sure that from an operational standpoint, from the care and feeding, upgrades and everything else. So it's very, very critical that we have very strong knowledge transfer over to whomever is going to pick up the care and feeding of ServiceNow, and we had that very warm, handoff. So again, there's a lot of strategies for this. Me personally, I like having, whoever's going to take things over engaged earlier rather than later. That way they learn what we've done, they understand that why certain decisions were made, those type of things. And it really helps with that handoff. It definitely helps with the knowledge transfer, and it makes it a very smooth transition. So once, we say, my team leaves to move to the next engagement, you've got the football. You're ready to move on, and you're very successful, and you feel confident that you can support ServiceNow.
Awesome. All right, we do have a couple of questions. So first up, Fitz wanted to know, is there an average ITSM implementation timeframe, with the understanding that that's kind of a difficult question to answer?
Wow. I don't know what the official ServiceNow answer on this is. I'll be honest with you. I think probably it's going to depend a lot of factors: size of the organization. Do you go with, sticking to out of box? So obviously my answer is going to be very qualified based off a lot of different factors, but 3 to 6 months, but it also can be based off of, the industry you're in. So a banking industry, and that's my current customer right now. Everything has to be super documented, and you have to have justification, evidence for every decision made, down to documenting who was in each meeting, so forth and so on. So you spend a lot of time just documentation. But if it's more, pure play out of box, it can happen relatively quickly. I mean, and this is stand up, incident management is very, very quick.
Yeah, I've seen it go like in 6 weeks, but that's somebody who's a fairly smaller customer, and they're really focused and organized, and they have the team ready to go and everything. Sarah had a question, which we didn't really touch on at all. What are the key performance indicators you use to track the success of your ServiceNow implementations?
KPIs. Yeah, that's a good, well, so there's going to really be, several. From a high level, it's really, financial. And so again, the key ones that I'm focused on, obviously we have quality metrics, we have everything else. I mean, there's really a lot, but financial, so tracking from a because we do the resource management, the forecasting, making sure we're tracking in terms of estimate to complete, estimate at complete. That's why honestly I spend a lot of my time when I focus on. Also too, looking at from a time standpoint, looking at especially, in terms of building out the project plan itself, making sure we're hitting those particular deadlines, hitting those particular milestones. And when it kind of gets into, sprint planning, we establish, what's the backlog, what are we going to do in particular sprints, looking at our burn down, measuring against what our projected is, against what our actual is, and really tracking that. Because again, and this becomes very easy to do, right? You get to a situation to where people get overly aggressive, or technical people have a tendency, in my experience, I was very technical back in the day, of overestimating what they can get done in a period of time. So they can, I can do these 5 stories, 30 story points or whatever in this particular sprint, but they only do 4. So, instead of 4 stories instead of 5, what's the root cause for that? And this is kind of gets into why it's really important to have the retrospective to understand, so you can do better planning in the future for the next sprint. And also from a PI planning standpoint, if you go from a PI standpoint, how many deliverables, how many epics did you commit to, how many did you actually deliver? So understanding what those are. So tracking those, measuring them, and understanding if you came above or under that particular commitment, and adjusting going forward. You have, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to mention defects too. If you're getting a lot of defects, maybe, you go back and look at your stories. Maybe they aren't written succinctly or well enough to get to the requirements. So that's another area I think you can look at.
Yeah, I was going to go to looking at defects, and by the way, there are different types of defects too. There's requirement defects, and there's also technical defects. To delineate between the two, requirement, defect, quote unquote, is really the developer implemented based off of the story set. Acceptance criteria, everything is perfect. It turns out that this story itself was incorrect, and so there's incorrect information in there. So that's really requirements, defects. So understanding what the defects are, understand that the root cause, and going through and making sure that you help remediate. I will say the other key thing too is those learnings, those lessons learned, and this often is not done well enough, is capturing those and feeding that into the next engagement itself. So if you had trouble with estimating the work that actually can be accomplished, understanding why and getting that fed into the next engagement is actually really, really critical. So you're not, repeating the same mistakes that you've done in the past.
Yeah, so that's not a good use of anybody's time. We do have like 2 minutes left here. Oh, actually, we're down to 1 minute now. So I will just go in and quickly review. We have some resources that will be available for you if you want to, learn more about expert services and what we do or impact and now create. This deck will be available on the community and the expert services discussion area. It'll probably take me a day or two to get that posted up there along with the recording. And thank you all for coming today. Hope you got some valuable insights here. And next week, same time, same bat channel, we'll be talking about how to work with partners. So if that's something else that you want some information on, please register for that and join us next week. Other than that, thank you all for coming today and look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.